Talking Solutions, a podcast, and I'm welcoming in the founder of Mogami Wellness, Saori Okada, with us today. And Saori, how are you?
Yeah, well, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and so Ori, this is going to be a really interesting conversation for me because we're talking a little bit about kind of health and wellness, mental well-being, and just individual well-being as a whole, but from a different frame of lens that's not necessarily that kind of standard Western wellness that we kind of think of as well. So I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation and share those insights. So just to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about Mogami Wellness and what exactly it is that you do and kind of that journey that brought you here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mogami Wellness is a wellness company that has a mission to empower individuals to achieve sustainable personal wellness lives. And this is done through Japanese wellness and cultural principles. And in terms of my journey, I'll try to keep this short. I'm originally from Japan, and I was born in a place called Aomori. And I do have an international background though. So I lived in the States when I was younger. I also went to international school. And then for my undergrad, I studied at the University of Virginia and I studied business there. And then after I graduated, I worked in New York for about 7 years. So I worked in media analytics, which is a little bit different from health and wellness. But I really enjoyed that part of my career. But at the same time, I think there was always a part of me that was interested in health and well-being. And that might be because I come from a family of medical professionals. My father's a doctor, my mother's a nurse, and my sister's also a doctor. And so I think this idea of taking care of yourself was something that I was always passionate about. And for me, that meant I went to school to become a certified wellness coach while I was working. But I also was going through a personal health and wellness journey, which I think everyone is. And for me, that was actually where I was hyper focused on what I looked like. And I had a really strict relationship with exercise and food. And it was really at the detriment of my own mental well being. And so it really was both a personal as well as I guess, professional or passion driven approach. And so in 2020, the pandemic hit. And it was very much a moment where I think all of us, including myself, took a moment to think about what I really wanted to do. And so this was when I realized that for me, my path was really to empower individuals in the best way I could do, which was about incorporating my wellness training, as well as my Japanese upbringing, which is a country known for its longevity, and to provide a different way of approaching health and well-being to the Western audience.
I love it. That's an interesting journey as well, especially with the family of doctors and things of that nature in the medical field and then putting kind of your own spin on it. And I love in 2020 kind of trying to figure out exactly what it was that you wanted to do and things of that nature as well. So let's kind of dive into it a little bit and kind of talk about the problem at hand that you're solving for. And one of the things that kind of stands out to me, I always find in well-being, health and wellness, mental health, things of that nature to be very interesting. And on the Western side of things, one of the things that you always hear specifically in America, I won't speak for other countries, but I remember Andrew Yang was running for president back in what was that 2016, 20, I think. And they were talking about America's the greatest country, blah blah blah, your typical American political kind of speak and whatnot, right? But Andrew Yang kind of put to the forefront a lot of these issues that were happening, for example, with men in suicides, drug overdoses, and how America's declining in that. And they've actually lost this was before the pandemic, but the average length of life actually came down. The average lifespan did. So those were all things that really made me interested. And I was like, well, maybe economically things are good, but clearly there's something going wrong from a mental well-being perspective on that front. So I would love to just kind of hear what you think in general and kind of some of the key differences are between kind of the Western well-being practices and what we have going on, because I do feel like they kind of lag a little bit behind other countries and things of that nature. And then, kind of compare that to Japan a little bit. And then, of course, we'll get down to the nitty-gritty here shortly. But just to kind of give that overview.
Yeah, I think when I think about the two problems that I think are main differences that I have observed. The first one is short term oriented, meaning when you look for, if you're on Instagram, perhaps you'll say lose 20 pounds in 14 days and get instant results. And I find it to be very short term oriented. And the challenge with that is that it's very attractive. And I have definitely fallen into that trap where, I signed up for a program, paid $3,000 to get on a 14-day juice cleanse that said I would lose 20 pounds. And while, you may be able to get a little bit of benefit for 2 weeks, what, I found from personal experience as well is that it's not going to be sustainable for your own long-term health. And so I think that's one key difference that I've noticed in the Western approach or in America, because we want instant results. But if we look at health and well-being, it's really about daily practices and looking at it from a long-term view. And I think the second main problem or difference that I see is that it's not holistic. And I think it's changing, which is fantastic, where, it used to be all about physical well-being and taking care of your body. Now there's such a positive momentum in mental health, which is fantastic. But on top of that, I think something else that we want to consider is taking care of something that's not just your mind, but your soul. And I know sometimes when I say soul, people look at me like I'm going to sell them crystals. I'm not. It's really more about understanding that perhaps there's something, people call it consciousness, people call it your purpose, or people call it something else. But it's really about what your heart is trying to do and what it wants to do in life. And I use this approach because in Japan, for example, you have a body that you want to take care of, but you also have a soul that you want to take care of. And when you look at how you want to take care of yourself, it's really holistic. So you're taking a look at how you want to take care of your body, but also how you want to take care of your soul. So in applying it to the States, I think the better way of approaching it is you want to take care of your physical health, you want to take care of your mental health, but you also want to make sure those two balance each other out in both a professional setting, but also a personal life setting.
Yeah, yeah. A couple things there that kind of popped into my mind as you were kind of speaking about that as well is the instant gratification. I mean, you see that everywhere. If that whether that's a product of marketing in business and just kind of capitalizing on that, I don't know. It certainly seems that way. But that's a really good point. Like, I mean, I know people that personally that fall into, what are called like those fad diets or whatever it might be, where you might get those instant results, but it's not sustainable because you're kind of cheating the code. And that ultimately what health and wellness is a lifestyle. It's an everyday thing, but you're not going to be progressing with instant results. But that's an interesting thing that, yeah, here in America specifically, and I'm sure in the UK as well, suffers from that issue a little bit too, where you get that I need that instant gratification, but your health and wellness is something that's long term, and kind of sticks with you every day. So I find that really interesting on that front. Do you know off the top of your head, maybe kind of when, for example, in Japan, the well-being and the soul, and like you were talking about in that second half, taking care of the soul in addition to the physical, when did that really kind of start from the forefront? And then when do you kind of think that the Western countries kind of started to get a little bit more, because I would think it's recent, the Western countries started to get a little bit more into taking care of their soul and their mind and the holistic well-being in addition to the physical portion of your body?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something that comes to mind is, the traditional arts. And Japan has three traditional arts with over 2,000 years of history. So you could say that, Japan has been around for a long time. And the very first word of a soul is tamashi. And it's this idea that as a human, you have a body, a physical body, and a soul. And that's really the traditional way that it's always been. And I bring this back to calligraphy because calligraphy is one of the three traditional arts, and I've been practicing for about 20 years. And so I feel as though I could speak to this a little bit. But in Japanese calligraphy, there is something what we call mushin. And mushin is where you have complete presence and you are free of all thoughts, all assumptions, and all prejudice. But it's actually a state where you focus on your soul, but you're completely present, which is sounds a little bit difficult to understand and conceptualize, but the whole goal of that is that through the practice of doing these arts, you're able to understand what it means to live a intentional, holistic life.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And so thinking about your question about when the Western, in the States, when did this come to be? The closest I can think of is yoga,
Mm,
because
that's it.
yeah, I do think yoga was probably the first movement where, of course, it's about connecting with your body, but the whole goal of yoga is to really have that inner connection with your body and your soul.
Right. Yeah. It's just to kind of cleanse, which I struggled with. I went and did the hot yoga, which I guess is a little different. And, it's hard to let go sometimes. It's hard to let go sometimes of your mind and your thoughts and to be really present with your body and yourself and in that moment. So that's a good one. I yoga that didn't come to the top of my head, but yeah, that definitely I think would make sense. Just something to look at. But again, and I want to kind of stress the importance here of this can apply to everybody and individuals. Like this is something that everybody should be kind of looking at and doing to try to improve upon themselves as well. But specifically in this episode, what I'd like to kind of bring it into as well is kind of the stresses that come from being a startup founder in specific, or a founder of anything, high stress job as an executive, whatever it might be in your life. But from a founder perspective, obviously you face a lot of challenges, and you're well aware of this as well, where you feel like you got to do so many different things. Oh, if I take any time off, then I'm going to fall really far behind and I won't make money and we won't progress and this feature won't get pushed, blah, 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 as it might be as well. So what do you think some of those detriments can be from kind of that founder and that grind process if you don't take care of yourself and you don't take that time? What type of problems do you think you could see yourself kind of leading down towards if you don't kind of take care of yourself there?
hmm Yeah, and I will say I am a founder myself, and so my heart goes out to every single founder because it really is a challenging, role that I really respect anyone that has either, that tries to and attempts to be a founder. It's a hard job, and I think what I think can be detrimental is that, long term, if you're in high amounts of stress, we know that it has physiological, impact on your body. And we really want to pay attention when I work with, founders or people who are in high stress situations is what is driving you every day. And, at the vision of Mogami is where we imagine a world where everyone has an inner knowing of who they are. And it's really about the intrinsic values that need to drive your everyday decision making and your lifestyle. And so I think as a founder, you have a passion for what you do, of course, which is really important and beautiful. But at the same time, what we want to do is never forget to take care of yourself first in both a professional and personal life. So it really is about, when you think holistically, it's of course about your physical well-being, your mental well-being, but also your personal life and your professional life. And so we really want to make sure that when you're assessing your lifestyle, it's with you as the center and not your job as the center.
And I think that could go such a long way and improving outcomes within your company, within your personal life as well. And so let's kind of dive into the solution now. Let's kind of talk a little bit more about what you're doing and what the Mogami Wellness Framework is, how it's kind of applied, and what you kind of do with who you work with, whether that be startup founders directly or individuals that just are trying to improve themselves on that front. So you've already kind of started talking about it a little bit as well, but what is the Mogami Wellness Framework for people that don't know?
Yeah, so The Mogami Wellness Framework is a Japanese wellness framework that's centered around longevity. And I know, Will, we talked about this a little bit earlier on, where it talks about the daily lifestyles. So it's not really about the short term approach to your well being, but it's essentially 4 factors that you want to focus on in a daily aspect. So let's break down each of them briefly. So the first one is presence and mindfulness. So I did talk a little bit about this, but for the Mogami Wellness Framework, we use the 3 traditional arts as guiding principles because these have over 2,000 years of history, and the principles of these arts are said to help us understand how to be present and more mindful in our lives. The second one is body and soul care. So, like I mentioned, in Japan, each human has a body and a soul to take care of. And there's different factors that we want to consider for each body and soul care, but it's really about how can we make sure we're taking care of both when we're assessing our well-being. The third one is authenticity and wabi-sabi. I really think this is an important one because I think authenticity is a hot word topic right now and is used left and right. But I get a lot of clients that say, what does that mean? What does that mean to be authentic? And in the Mogami Wellness Framework, we use this concept called wabi-sabi, which is this idea that nature is, the ultimate guide to be how you could be yourself. And it has 3 main principles. It is imperfect, it is impermanent, so it means it comes and goes, and then it's incomplete, meaning we are continuously evolving. And then the last concept is Ikigai. And Ikigai is the Japanese concept for reason for being or purpose. And it's not the Venn diagram that's commonly been communicated. It's actually more about taking daily actions that align with your authentic self.
Yeah, and can you expand on that the Venn diagram that's so popular as well that people are kind of like, oh, that sounds familiar when I think of it, and then just kind of what the exact differences are, because I do think a lot of people, and myself included, get a little misconception on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the popular Ikigai Venn diagram is essentially saying that your purpose or your life reason for being is the intersection between what you love doing, what you get paid for, what you're good at, and what the world needs. Unfortunately, this is not Ikigai, but a Spanish astrologer's purpose model that was created by Andrew Suzunaga, irrespective of Ikigai. And what looks to have happened is where there was a blogger named Mark Wynn, and he listened to a TED Talk by Dan Buettner that talked about Japan and longevity, and they referred to this concept of Ikigai. He heard this concept, and then he saw Andrew's purpose model, and then he changed the words from purpose to Ikigai, wrote a blog about it, and the rest is history, essentially, where, now I think it's used as essentially the definition of what Ikigai is. Unfortunately, I say that this is harmful to the true definition of what Ikigai is, because the Venn diagram narrows down your life's purpose to your profession. And that is not true. It's also not serving you, because it almost tells you that what you love or your reason for being has to be your job. It has to make you money. And it's actually something that I think is constrictive versus Ikigai, the real definition, is more expansive.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a very American thing to do, to just go, oh, profession, everything work related. It has to be work related. It's one thing I hear when I go abroad or something. Oh, yeah, you guys always just ask what you do for work so fast in a conversation. I'm like, well, I wasn't aware of that until now, but yeah, I guess so. Interesting. So that's really kind of fascinating to me as well, when you kind of look at through that and the misconceptions with Ikigai, and then in addition to those 4 things as well. I mean, I think that those 4 pillars are really really an interesting kind of way. And what is kind of, and I'd love to see kind of what that process looks like. So for example, how could an individual, we'll use a startup founder example in this, a high stress environment, I'm feeling like I'm losing myself. I'm constantly kind of thinking externally, maybe not so much internally, trying to work on, my own well-being and things of that nature. How does that approach kind of look when they go to you in the Mogami Wellness Program and the framework that you teach? How does that kind of look to start, and how do they apply that directly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say there's three main levels that you could utilize. The first one is educate. So if you're curious to learn more about what Japanese wellness and Japanese way of living, what it's about, then there's a lot of free resources that we have on my website and as well as on our social media channels. And then there's also some online courses that I offer that go into a little bit more of, what does it mean to be present? What is the real definition of Ikigai, for example? And the second one is more about, integrate. So if you want to really learn more from a personal perspective, then you can do private coaching with me. So we do have a 6-week program when we first work together that's really about building that self-awareness that's within this Mogami wellness framework. And then the last one is really about taking a group approach to this, which I think is really powerful because when we think about, companies and even as a founder, of course, it's a big part of our lives and it should be, and it really should align with who we are and what we want to do. But, back to, we were chatting earlier about how our phone just gives us so many notifications per day. Sometimes we have so much stimulus that's coming from external sources, and we really don't have that time to be present and still for ourselves. And so in the group setting, what we do is we do group calligraphy, mindfulness events. And this is really where we have a collective moment of being here, being present, disconnecting, and connecting together with ourselves as well as, the company mission and culture.
Yeah, God, that sounds great. It sounds fantastic. Lots of ways, and we're definitely going to talk more about ways people can get in contact with you to start applying these principles here at the end as well. But one thing that kind of stands out to me, and a question that I asked, because I had this thought sometimes too, and it was a wrong thought in my opinion. But some of the things, and I think some of the challenges, at least in the Western society, with it, is because I feel like it's so new, and like what I'm trying to say here basically is when, for example, you go into this health and wellness, right, and it's spiritual and it's mindfulness. I, for example, have a very difficult time. So I would probably benefit from your teachings. I have a very difficult time kind of turning the brain off, right, and things of that nature as well. So, like, how can you go about taking people who do struggle with that and maybe might be, I don't want to say against it, but kind of speculative of things of that nature as well. And then how do you kind of bring that person in to kind of help go, hey, these are the benefits you're going to have. So if you stick with me, like these are some positive outcomes that might occur from this teaching and this framework.
Yeah, and I think the skepticism is fair. I think it's a very different approach, and so I think it makes sense that people are skeptical of certain ways of thinking, and so it's more about I would ask each client. There must be a reason why you're reaching out. Is it that are you completely fulfilled with your life? And if the answer is yes, then there's no need to, go through this program. But when I look at the, rising obesity rates across the world or the rise of, mental health, we are not going in the right direction. And so if we look at that, then I think it's about where can we start? And I think, for example, using the arts is a great starting point because it's not necessarily, we're not talking about the soul. We're really trying something new with our, it's a cultural experience. And that has nothing really to do with spirituality. It's more about learning something different, which I think is much more, aligned with some of the mind versus, us talking about spirituality.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anytime that you can challenge yourself, learn a new skill, and learn more about culture, learning in general is fantastic for the mind. I mean, it's great for the brain. I had a great grandmother who lived to about 97, 98, and she was convinced that Scrabble was a big part of why she grew older because she'd study the dictionary and read and learn. That's not based on any evidence, of course, but she had that mental wealth, that mental thought for a long time, and that quick wittedness. But I think you said a couple things too. For me, when I think about it, it's because I feel like so many more people should benefit from it. But I think in Western culture, people get cringed out maybe sometimes about how, oh, I should be at one with myself and, really thinking and trying to improve. And, you get caught, like we talked about, in your phone, and notifications and everything that's external. And now I need some gratification. I don't want to work on it. So I find it interesting because clearly in Japan and in other countries as well, where it's talked about a little bit more, the longevity factor rises. There's less obesity, and we don't have all these bad mental health statistics. They don't have as many mental health statistics that are as negative as some in Americas and in other Western parts. So I think that's an interesting kind of thing on that. And would you say that within the last, well, certainly since you've started your work within the last few years, but just observing as a citizen as well, would you say that the trend is kind of getting bucked on the Western side, and that people are starting to become a lot more open to the idea of it?
Yes, I think the pandemic probably was a big wake up call for everyone, including myself. I think we went through, and we are still going through, I think, in many ways, 2 years of a collective experience of high stress. And I think we are still going to see the aftermath of it play out in the coming years. But it was almost as if it was a forced pause. And I think I've seen such a big movement within organizations and leaders having to have these conversations, which I feel as though was not previously if it wasn't for, a pandemic. And so I think it was probably a really important moment for us to not go back to our default, but really try to change our default. And that includes your mental well-being, but also, sustainability and working with the environment, which is something that, even at Mogami, we talk about forest bathing, which is this concept that spending time in nature has physiological health benefits for us. And so it's really about working with Mother Nature to go back to how we could take care of ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. What are some of the specific, really great benefits that you get from being out in nature and in an environment like that?
Yeah, so forest bathing or shinrin-yoku is a term that was coined in Japan, and it was actually started in the 2000s as a program by the government, because they were trying to provide a ecological friendly way for people to improve their health. And so they did an experiment essentially, and research found that it lowers blood pressure, it increases our immune system, and it also helps us think more clearly. So it has some mental health benefits as well. And what's amazing about this is that it's completely free. You know, I think that's one of my favorite facts, because I also think that there's this idea that to be healthy, you have to buy X things and this program, and that's not necessarily true. And simply spending time in nature, taking a walk, that you're fully mindful and you're paying attention using your five senses, can have health benefits for you that are both physical and mental. And so those are a few key things that I think, if there was one thing that I think people can implement in their lives today, is to implement some forest bathing.
Forest bathing, go outside, relax, use those five senses, and get all the benefits as well. That's fantastic. How can, for example, a company, I know that you work with businesses sometimes and things of that nature as well, so within that kind of mindset and whatnot, if you're working with the founder, for example, what are some ways that they can implement the Mogami Wellness program within their own company and kind of create that as part of their own company culture to kind of align that kind of personal well-being and apply that to the company so that's sustainable and the company has that mindfulness going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's various strategies for companies to implement, well-being. And I think that's something that is probably being discussed among companies right now. Is it where we incorporate it in employee benefits? Is it where we include it in our lunch and learns? Is it where we have learning and development? And so, at Mogami, we really do work with companies and founders to really find the right approach. But, examples of that could be something as simple as I do speaking opportunities where we talk about these concepts. We also do these leadership enablement sessions where we incorporate some of the Japanese calligraphy classes and mindfulness approaches to help you be present. Because at the end of the day, I think for founders and for companies, what's important to consider is that, the leaders that you work with are great at their job. You hired them because they're very talented. They know how to run a team and do the job. But right now, I think it's a moment where we're not able to focus due to what we've been talking about. And so the Mogami Wellness Framework is really there as an implementation strategy to help bring back the focus for the founders, for your team, so that they can take a little bit of a deep breath, be with themselves, and be able to do their job.
Yeah, it's like what we kind of talked about earlier too. I think the outcomes are going to be more positive if you're not just singularly focused only about your job and what you're doing and your work, right? I mean, if you're taking that time to be content, and satisfied and happy and stuff like that, you're going to get better outcomes on that front. And I'd love to hear some of the feedback you're getting from the people since you've started, the people that you work with, the clients, specifically maybe some of the clients that come on and when you ask like, hey, are you content with your life? And they're like, no, but I guess I didn't really realize I wasn't, and then they kind of work with you and whatnot. I'd love to hear some of the feedback and some of the stories that you've gotten from clients.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's such a wide range of people that come as clients, and you have the skeptics, and I think the thing is they're very talented, they're very intellectual, but they're also curious. So it's about like, once you learn about how it's about teaching a different way of thinking, and it's really, you can make it an intellectual exercise, then I think they go through it with healthy doubt, but it's really through the experience and practicing it that, people can understand that, oh, perhaps it's, the soul doesn't have to be something as abstract or something as spiritual, because what I really try to do is break it down in a very logical way. So, for example, the soul, I simply say it's about connection. As social animals, we seek connection. And we have three main longings for connection, which is yourself, your community, and nature and the environment. So when we talk through it, then it goes from skepticism to an eventual, understanding that it's something that can be implemented in their daily lives. And so I think that's probably the most common feedback that we get, is that, they think that it's something like, oh, do I have to go to Japan to get, experience this? And the answer is no, really. It's about how can you learn, educate yourself, and then integrate it into your current existing lifestyle to make it more achievable.
It's adaptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's adaptable. It's flexible on that front too. And I think it's something like, sure, I made that, or I asked that question earlier kind of about people who might be a little bit more skeptical as a whole. And I just mean that in general too, specifically. I just think in Western culture, or I shouldn't say Western culture, because I haven't lived in the UK long enough or anything like that to speak on behalf of some of the other countries, but in Europe and Australia, but in America specifically, I think we're slow to change. I think we're slow to adaptation. I think we're seeing that change now. Well, maybe not on the business side of things, but in the personal well-being, I think we're slow to adapt, and we're always a little skeptic of other ideas. And I think the Japanese and what you're teaching with this Mogami Wellness framework is something that most people could really benefit from. And I think it's something that clearly has legs over in Japan. And I think it's great that you're able to just kind of explore this with clients and bring that over to people in the UK and then in people in the US as well. So I think that that's really an important part of it. And on that note, I would love to ask you just kind of how you see the future lining up for this, because as I mentioned, I'm seeing much more people, Instagram, whatever it might be, getting more into kind of this holistic well-being, and life's not all about going to work from 9 to 5 and coming home and watching TV and complaining about your life and then doing the same thing the next day and getting a little bit of briefness from your kids or something, right? So what do you see in the future, and how this kind of will progress, whether it's through the Mogami Wellness Framework or other avenues of becoming more self-aware and more content with yourself? How do you see that kind of evolving over the next, 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I think I'm very optimistic. And meaning, I think that we have all been given an opportunity with the pandemic to take a moment of pause. And now I think there's a lot of liberation in the sense of we all get to choose. I think there is a really strong movement in being able to choose what kind of life you want to live. The fact that, digital nomads, companies that are more digital centric, there is this idea of being a multi hyphen where you don't have one corporate career, you could have multiple. And so I think the possibilities are growing for individuals to really think back and create a life that they want to live that's beyond their professional life, but also their personal life, because it's about, again, it's human centric and it's taking you as the center of how you want to live your life. So I do see a big movement there. I've also seen a really strong movement in taking care of the planet, which I think is really important. And I know, well, you have had great guests that talk about sustainable approaches and businesses, and I think that's amazing. And I also think that, my hope is that people realize that their well-being and their lifestyle has to be sustainable, both for the planet, but also for their health and well-being. And it should be working with nature as well. So I think those are the two things that I see as trends that I hope people grasp, but also understand that with a lot of decisions and opportunities, it could also be confusing. So I think if people are scared or if people are confused with how to proceed, I think that's a completely normal feeling to have. And so it's about really coming together as a community and working with each other to support this new way of living.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Well, get out and do a forest or go forest bath, forest bathing, right? Go out there and really get in there and get in touch with it. And then the sustainability will start to click a little bit more. And now you're getting a whole nother benefit in addition to all the mental health stuff and the greatness and the five senses. So I think that's kind of wonderful on that front as well. And just kind of moving forward for you, you mentioned this just briefly about kind of tips, and you can implement that into your life as well. I know that you had mentioned this earlier, but you actually on your website at mogamiwellness.com, you have some free resources so that people can learn more about this and download, because I'm sure people still have quite a lot of questions. And it's a really interesting kind of framework that I think deserves to be kind of learned a little bit more for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a free Ikigai guide where we break down what Ikigai really means. And then I also do have a YouTube channel and then all the socials that provide a lot of free resources into more of a deep dive into all of these concepts. And, I think I know it can be intimidating when it's completely something new. So, I just hope that people come in with a curious set of eyes. If you have any questions, we could always do a deep dive. My email's on there. You could reach out to me as well. So that would be my tip in terms of starting out.
Yeah, and then once they get that more information and they're like, all right, so Ori's onto something here. I really want to learn this. I want to apply this to my life. You offer what, 3 services, correct? You have courses, and then you have group coaching you mentioned earlier, and then of course the one-on-one.
That's exactly right. Well,
Awesome. And then people can just reach out to you via the website, social media, or anything of that nature.
Exactly. Yep. You could go to mogamiwellness.com.
Awesome. MogamiWellness.com. If you're a company, a startup founder, you can start implementing this and things of that nature as well. Set up some speaking and really kind of turn that company into something that's going to be a little bit more fulfilling for everybody. Not that your startup is not fulfilling, but you know what I mean? It can be always a little bit more that you can do for the employees and things of that nature as well. And so, Ori, is there anything else that you would like to kind of add to this conversation that you feel like maybe we missed or that you'd like to address?
No, I think it's been a great conversation. I guess the only thing that pops up for me is that I just hope people understand and acknowledge from themselves that everyone is probably doing a lot. And it really starts with this idea of self awareness and being kind to yourself, which I think as founders, I know myself, I always feel like I have to keep going, keep going, keep going. And I don't really take the moment to pause and reflect on everything that I've done so far. So, the moment there is such strength in taking a moment to pause and appreciate everything you've done so far. So I think that's something that I just hope everyone does.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on like bullet journals or journals in general on that note? Because
Oh,
that's something that I use to try to remind myself. And I was having this conversation the other day with a friend where, when you work for yourself and stuff, you're measuring your own success all the time. And as a human, psychologically, we always want more, even if we have a lot, right? And so it's always something about context for me. So what are some tips, to get people that they can remind themselves like, hey, you are doing well. You're always going to have things that you want more and that you're striving for, but take a second, reflect, and kind of move forward. What tips would you have for those people?
yes, that's amazing that you have a bullet journal. I think a few other ideas that I have is that you could, do a gratitude journal, just ending or starting the day with three things that you're grateful for. Another idea I have is I always set intentions for the day. And this is something that is really important to me. And so, what you do is every morning you set a clear intention of what you want to focus on for that day. And while it can be task oriented, which I think is a pretty natural inclination, what I would encourage people to do is try to find something that's more intrinsic. So, it's not external. So I think that's something that's really helpful. And then my last tip is to clearly define what success means to you. I think
Exactly.
clarity is the key to making sure that you feel fulfilled. And for example, in the field of entrepreneurship, I think the odds are against us. But I always think it depends on the definition. So for me, for example, my definition of success is that if I can truly say to myself that I gave it my all and I was able to learn something and I was true to myself and the company mission, then that is a successful company and a successful day. So every day I have this mantra and I reflect back on it. And that's something that I think is really powerful when you have that clarity.
Yeah, define what is success to you, right? Like how would you define success? And then kind of going from there, I think is really important instead of measuring yourself up against others at times. So it's wonderful stuff. So Ori, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed the conversation, learning more about the Mogami Wellness framework and learning more just overall about Ikigai and all these practices that can lead to better kind of outcomes, positive outcomes, and better well-being. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
That is the founder of Mogami Wellness, Saori Okada, joining us here on the Talkin' Solutions podcast. You can find more information, as mentioned before, at mogamiwellness.com. That's Mogami wellness.com. And you can get tons of free resources available there. And then also get in touch with her for services on that note as well. You can also follow on social media as well on Instagram, mentioned YouTube. So make sure you follow there to get some more great content on that front and really be able to apply that to your lives today, whether you're an individual, whether you're a startup founder, or whatever it is that you may do. You most certainly can benefit from learning a little bit more to kind of help find your authentic wellness, if you will. and whatnot. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Talking Solutions podcast. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to leave a review, drop 5 stars, whatever it might be, and then follow us on social media, and then of course subscribe to our newsletter. But until next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks for listening to the Talkin' Solutions podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new episode and check out all of our guests on our website at cheshtech.com. That's CHESHTECH.com to learn more as we continue our mission of supporting impact-driven founders. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Talkin' Solutions Podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Talkin' Solutions. If you liked this episode, I'd really appreciate a review and a recommendation to a friend as we focus on highlighting these great founders and individuals providing solutions to societal problems and bringing optimism into the world.